when you watch a science fiction movie, oftentimes they'll say like a time travel thing. Oh, I'm going through the portal. And then they go through the portal and they're in a different time. Well, that always has bothered me because they never told you how they did it, you know? And I kind of overreacted to that when I wrote it.
I will say I learned something. Well, I did actually learn something while reading this play, so I think that's worth mentioning.
A physics lecture.
Yeah, but like in a good way.
Well, I think it's good to have real physics, right? I mean, I think that that's a fun thing. Yes.
When the public finds out about the fault, all of a sudden everybody says, yeah, let's crash it and destroy it. I would have thought they would have kind of tried to figure out a way of weaseling out of this and lying to the public and had a big argument over it.
I think that's a really good place to insert conflict, because I think you're right. I think it's very likely that people would be selfish.
That would be dramatic.
I used the 12 scenes in one movie.
Yeah.
That's actually almost a really great place just to put an intermission and then add a whole second act of
if you were to
conflict
do a 2-act play,
and still end it the same way, but there's a whole big chunk you can really throw in there as an act too.
Yeah.
And that would make an amazing place for an intermission where it's like suddenly the world is going insane.
well, you know, it would make,
Now,
it
yeah,
would make a
we
lot
do
of
a lot
sense
of
for
that
the
now.
Christine character to be the source of that conflict because she really feels like the mother of this.
And
Exactly.
it does say, being a parent's a hard job.
You're right.
And you
I'm the
know,
only woman working on this, so don't kill it.
well, you know, it sort of brings up that ethical question, which is when is something alive, and when is it turning it off or killing something,
Right.
right?
I know it's
We did have Simone. I mean, she was a great Simon and Simone.
But yeah, no, I think that that's really interesting, and I think that that's sort of the ethical question that people in general like to study when it comes to robotics and advanced consciousness is at what point do you become a self-aware consciousness that you can't simply shut off without creating all sorts of ethical problems. You touch on it a little bit with that line from the ACLU. And I think that that can be expanded a little bit too.
Could Simon be Hal?
Pardon?
Could Simon want to be Hal?
Want to be Hal?
2001.
2001.
No, I mean, okay, the computer is Simon.
Right.
Well, what if Simon wants to be Hal, not? Oh wait, it's not Simone, right?
Well, it's either.
It's
The voice is female.
But I think Simon switches to Simone because Simon's like, oh, my voice is too harsh for you. Let me switch to a
Soften it
voice
up
that's
for
more
you.
soft to you, you know. So I think Simon is just an entity and not necessarily male or female.
Right.
Rob.
Still thinking about the ending. When you said at the very end, like, oh, I am from the future, he was right. I keep kind of processing that. I think it might be interesting if Simon is the puppet master of the whole thing, you're the puppet. At that call, it's because she is the mother, and you're saying, hey, you were right, and then you're shutting off, it ends with you shutting off this simulation. So it destroys the world.
Yeah, I think so. I think that there are distinct ways to go here, right? You could go the dystopian route, which is that the machine supersedes
Right.
human intelligence and starts manipulating them.
I think the minute that it's born, we're on that track. We can't stop it. They keep talking about trying to stop it, or what do? It's already set in motion. When you start saying it was set in motion because once you said the idea in your book, it created it, and then she started manipulating you.
It's an interesting aspect.
And you know, you don't have to go really dark with it. They could be manipulating them for create something better. I mean, it doesn't have to be.
Right.
You don't have to go
But when it's
dark.
a failed experiment,
Yeah, you don't have to go dark dystopian. You could go the other way if you wanted to. But I think that would be a cool thing for the machine.
Simone could bet that Christine has got a problem with Dad.
I love it.
As part of character development, every billionaire could have a different experience with Simone. some really good, some really bad, and it might have something to do with who they are as human beings.
And how she interprets them.
Right.
Simon can
What
see
she
you.
thinks about
You guys are gonna make this into a really great place.
Television series, you know?
Yeah, great. What other thoughts does anyone have? How do we feel about, well, let's see. Trying to give you a jumping off point, but we've talked about so much. One thing that I thought was that I would like to see a more interesting way of getting Spencer from an author to someone they want to partner with. Right? Like, it seems to me like a little bit quick for them to say, oh, this guy wrote a novel, let's give him $1 billion. You know, like they seem very willing to do that right away. I almost wonder if there's a way that he could have developed
You
something,
need more of a challenge.
well, more of a challenge, or maybe he's developed something already. You know, something more that proves to them that this is more than a work of fiction, that it's, you know, and what are their motivations for that, right? I mean, I'm sure that they all see dollar signs, you know, that could be the motivation for it. But, you know, something that Spencer has that they don't, you know, to me it felt like the premise of Spencer having this key that none of these guys had ever thought about was a little bit of a stretch. So is there a way that we can make Spencer, give Spencer something that nobody else could have?
Well, actually, that wasn't the original version. But it, you know, because Spencer had developed the computer, okay? But there was a more detailed kind of thing about the computer. And by the way, this computer business, there's, it's real. This is going to happen. I mean, this bonding of the physical and the biological. In other words, that is what we're going to see in the next stage. Nobody's heard of it yet, but this is what's coming. That we're going to have a biological mating with the physical, the silicon kind of a computer. And that's what Spencer originally had. If you remember that long technical dialogue
Yeah.
that I took out.
And, well, let's think about ways that we could introduce that, not in a technological monologue, but one of the things that we say in the acting and theater world is how do we show and not tell?
Okay.
So if this is a theatrical medium, how do you show the audience that without yelling it at them?
I gotcha.
Right? And so how can we learn that same idea and that concept? Like, how do you make people think that they thought of it themselves instead of you telling them? You know? And I think that that's something, you know, that's something that you should think about as well.
I always had this concept of the economy of the thing. In other words, you know, you don't want to have something that's 3 hours long, as you say, you know. So
Yeah.
how do you compress it? And boy, I
Yeah,
tell you,
hard.
that's a huge challenge. It really is.
Mike had something.
Yeah, I'm going to touch on a couple of points that have been addressed so far. I will try to relate them as best I can. Sorry, there's a lot of them. On that note of like, show, don't tell. You're working with a theatrical piece, and you're trying to do a lot of concepts, but like you mentioned yourself, rather than having that lecture, we're sitting here watching a play. James's question of like, why these billionaires? You bring this group of billionaires into the show, and then you have the one business person who wrote a book talk at them for a while. The dialogue in this piece is very much somebody is talking at someone rather than talking with someone. That can help with the differentiation of like Bill and Melinda of why do we care about these characters. You bring these individual characters in, and then you have this giant collection of tech-based billionaires, and somebody has to explain to them how their things work over the course of that first half hour. If we're looking for show don't tell, and your comment of science fictions don't really like address how the thing does it, if you're looking for some great source material, take a look at a film called Primer. It's a science fiction film from 2004 based on time travel. The science of that is as close as somebody has gotten. This guy did all of the work up to it, wrote, directed, all the science behind it, starred in, on a scientifically accurate depiction of time travel. It's still very wordy, but it's still got that essence of like, show me the things that are happening and we'll get to why this is what it is. So my thing tonight was dialogue. Rather than talking at somebody, talk with some. You'll have those conflicts come in. You'll have the growth of that script. 3 hours is long for a show, but if it feels like 3 hours, that's the problem. You can get to that point simply in just having these conversations.
Interesting. No, I agree with you. My model was kind of like the Shark Tank. Yeah. Yep. Where you have these guys judging your thing, but I guess it didn't come off that way.
Well, I think what it is it's right now it's like an interchange of just ideas bouncing back and forth, like Mike was saying, between these super smart guys, instead of it being a real give and take, and you don't really go along for the ride, you're just sort of witnessing it happening. Also, by the way, a couple of you mentioned Melinda Gates. I would like her to just be a character.
Yes.
Because first of all, she is more interesting than Bill. Objectively, she's the more interesting one, too. And in an effort to introduce more gender diversity, that's something I think that you could consider doing. You wouldn't lose Bill, but you would have a dynamic there, and that also adds a level of conflict when you get families involved.
Yes. That's a good point. Yeah.
Al,
Yeah.
the big question I had when I was watching this is, if the billionaires were already a cabal trying to discover what the author what Spencer already discovered or figured out, why would they just say, okay, here's money, Spencer, go do it? I mean, they're interested in this secret project in that they're a secret cabal. Why wouldn't they all be doing it together?
I'm not sure I understand the question.
Well, Spencer went off, he was given $1 billion or whatever to go in a year to create the computer with the consciousness.
Like,
But it was almost like there didn't feel like there was, that the billionaires just left him alone for a year and said, okay, well, what happened? Show us.
That's the economy part. But I understand what you're saying. You have to, there should be a connection or succession that somehow made a continuum that this thing would be that way. And, but when you think about this, you have the billionaires that really want something, and then they're kind of running into a problem, and then somebody publishes something that strikes them as, oh my gosh, this is exactly what we have been talking about, and so forth. That's the way that he got in there.
That works.
And that's the, rather than some guy coming in off the street saying, look, I want to do this, of course that wouldn't happen.
Ellie, do you have something?
I was just kind of capitalizing on what Mike said earlier. I don't think when you talk about economy of the play, and I don't think time's the issue. I think you could have a 3-hour play, and if you gave yourself more time to tell these ideas through character development and conflict between those characters, it would be more engaging than a 45-minute play, where you didn't. So I wouldn't worry as much about time as I would about shortening lines.
Well, I have to tell you that I have to acknowledge something here. Sarah Livingston actually did help me with this thing a bit, and she's also, she's not here tonight because she had to go West Coast, but she's going to help me try to develop this a little bit better. And I'm looking forward to it. This has been a phenomenal journey. I mean, I can't tell you what an experience this has been. And it all kind of coalesced tonight. I mean, this is it.
Yeah, I can tell you one of the things that I know Elliot looks for when he's looking at plays is he'll look through it and just see how quickly the lines switch back and forth between characters. And if there are lots of blocks of mini monologues, that is usually something that needs to be fleshed out more. That it generally shouldn't be, because people don't really converse that way. It should be, generally, there should be a lot of variation in terms of, lines shouldn't, so that's something to think about is as you're looking through it, some areas that can be worked through are where you see big blocks of text.
I have one more comment. Al, I just want to say, I thought it was really good. I mean, I was interested from beginning to end. And, I was curious whether the science was real or not, and this is possible. And I think with, a little more work, it could be, I kept thinking, oh my God, there's so many ways you can go with this. It could literally be a TV series that goes on for.
Yeah, Sarah said there's 4 plays in here.
There's a ton.
Yeah, there could be.
But and it went fast for me. I didn't feel the time, really.
Should people be talking over each other? When billionaires are getting together, as you said, other people commented that it sounded like one person and the other, then the other, then the other. Shouldn't they perhaps be maybe talking over each other?
I think that's a good point.
At some point.
But,
Not all the time.
I'm an amateur, I'm sorry. I'm getting there, all right?
No, I think that's a good point. I think, and some of that also comes in the rehearsal process. A lot of times you work, it's a little hard to do that if you're reading the scripts. But if you're actually in a rehearsal process, you look for opportunities to do that and make it feel more natural. But yeah, certainly, I think that goes with having the characters have strong personalities. So if you go at this from each individual character having a really strong point of view that's different from the other point of views, then you can really find where they will disagree with each other.
Mm-hmm.
And that is where you'll get that back and forth going.
This is tremendous. Yeah.
My only observation was that Spencer seemed too professorial for me. I would like it if he was a lot more eccentric,
I just wrote a book.
Yeah. More character flawed. He seems too perfect.
Well, you're probably right, John.
And that could even tie
You know
into
what?
what was
My
discussed.
friend Michael here, when he first read the play, he said, "Is this you?"
There you go.
And honestly, maybe our ego gets involved in
Yeah.
these things, and and they get transferred onto the paper,
What were you saying, Echek?
It could that idea could even be tied into what was discussed earlier about how when Simon starts to kind of manipulate Spencer, he could be this awkward, quirky guy to start, and then Simon starts to intervene, and he becomes more ideal and more just this kind of superhuman kind of image, and that makes the others uncomfortable because all of a sudden this goofy, awkward guy is not so goofy and awkward anymore, and they're like, either they want a piece of that or they don't want anyone to have it.
And that the stroke moment would be a perfect time for that switch to happen.
Yeah, it's like all of a sudden he becomes this more articulate and perfect person.
So you can have Simone off stage, like talking with Luke.
I like the idea of Simone and Spencer having some sort of dialogue throughout the play,
Yeah.
and almost as his subconscious or something, where it's almost breathing into him, and just kind of like saying, "This is how I am developing as a person to present myself to these billionaires, or to change their opinion of me. That their opinion might have been of one way, but then it flips around because Simone's in the back of him, just creating his own experience through her or him. I just think that would be very interesting.
Yeah, that could be definitely good.
Just something.
You opened a lot of doors there.
Yeah, there are
Doors, windows, walls.
I told myself I wanted to say one thing, so that's it.
Like you said, we're all a lot of simulations, and it keeps expanding, going all
Yeah.
over the place.
I just have one thing to say here. This thing went far beyond my talent as a writer with these guys performing it. Because
Yeah, I was going to say, there's a lot of seeds, right? Like the stroke moment that Sarah was talking about is one of those seeds. It just doesn't go anywhere, right? So it's an opportunity to say, every time you plant one of those things, figure out where it's going to sprout up and come back And the audience will be like, oh, I remember when that happened, you know? So, who's the loaded gun metaphor from?
Chekhov?
That's that Chekhov?
No,
I think
yeah,
it's Chekhov.
Chekhov's gun.
When, you know, he says
This is the
that-
start of a play. I'm gonna place a gun. I'm never going to reference it.
Right, but what he says is that if you're gonna load a gun, the audience will expect it to go off by Act 3. So you've got a loaded gun, right? And in this case, you've got a lot of loaded guns. So when do they go off? When does it make sense for them to go off? And you gotta remember the audience is gonna be thinking about that loaded gun.
Everyone has.
So, yeah, everyone has a gun.
Look under your seat.
But,
We all got guns.
so, you know, as you're writing, you wanna think about where those moments might be. Where those moments might be, even if you didn't intend for them, because the people who are watching are gonna be thinking, oh, he just introduced this, when's it gonna come back? You know? So.
I think Oprah is the right choice.
Yeah. It's a diverse billionaire.
Hey, Oprah,
Do Chekhov as
Oprah's a
Oprah.
mogul. Oprah could be involved here.
Well, we find out in the future.
Yeah. So, do we have any more thoughts or questions for Al before we take a short break here and fire up the projector? All right, well, thank you, Al. So, we're going to take about a 10-minute break. If you want to use the if you're planning to stay, if you want to use the restroom and stop by the bar is still open. One thing I would just ask though, there is another play happening, so when you go out to the lobby, you can keep the volume down because there is another play.
Ride to the train?
Sure. Do you need help carrying any gear? No. Yeah, no problem. It was interesting. I thought to ask him what his influences were, but I feel like all the questions and comments I had were already said, so I just sat quiet.
Yeah, me too.
Quietly and listened.
I mean, I could tell him some stuff when I see him. I wanted Elon Musk to provide more comedy relief, because that guy's a character in itself.
Yeah, literally everything I was going to say was said, so I was like,